So here is a Garelli moped carburetor. I believe it's from the early 80s. Correct me if I'm wrong. Not entirely sure the year on this scooter, but we're just going to take it apart quick and see what we find. There's a couple issues in performance, and this thing hasn't been running in quite a while, so it's good to just clean out the carburetor. So first thing we're going to do is remove these two screws on the bottom of the float bowl, and that will allow me to pull the bowl off, and there should be a seal in there and your other typical carburetor parts. So we'll remove these two screws, set them aside, and here's the bowl. It's not terribly dirty or anything. A little bit of silt in there. I'll clean that off in a minute. Here's the float. Moves freely. And there's the main jet. So what we're going to want to do is, with a sharp motion, once we got a little bit of pressure on it, just twist it and break it free. These are brass, so you want to use a quick sharp motion. Otherwise you risk stripping them out and damaging them. So here we have the main jet there. Now you won't be able to see it on the camera, but you can see through it. But we're still going to clean everything out anyway. Next thing would be to remove the float bowl, which means removing this pin that holds it in. And sometimes you can just take a thumbtack and just push the pin through one way or the other. There we go. A thumbtack did the trick. So, and then on these, what we can actually do is push the pin in this way, so it's caught between the edge here and the first mount. So we can remove the float bowl and the needle, and the pin still stays in there. Now what we can do is take a flashlight and inspect the seat in there. Make sure there's nothing in there that shouldn't be. We're going to spray this all out anyways. And it actually looks pretty good. It doesn't look like there's any scratches or any deformation of any kind in there. So that looks good. Next thing we'll take off would be the fuel inlet port right here. It's got one screw, which has a washer underneath it. So don't forget to put that back on when you take it off. And it's pretty crusty under there. It's a very, very old, worn out seal. And a lot of performance issues are caused right by this screen right in here. You can see there's quite a lot of crap built up in there. So the gas can't flow through as cleanly as it should, as quickly as it should. So very gently we'll remove this filter. And now remove the mixture screw from the side here. These right there, that's just for mounting it onto the intake tube, so that's not a big deal to leave that on there. The filter on here can just be pried up like that, and you can inspect it, make sure there's no ugly debris or anything in there. It just sits right in there. It's not a big deal. Pull it right off. And then we have this plate right in here, which was causing some issues. It moves freely and there's no gritty feeling in it, so I'm going to leave it on there and spray it out like this. And now there's nothing in here. At this point what we could do is we could actually soak it. If this was a different carburetor with a bunch of smaller little passageways, I would soak it and make sure everything was cleared out and the glaze was kind of eaten away, so I could spray it out cleanly. But being this old and being this simple of a design, I'm going to just spray it out because there's no super tiny passageways or anything, and I can pretty much get everything just with the little red hose that comes with the carb cleaning. I'm going to start out by showing you a couple parts I didn't show you. This is the actual slide for the carburetor. And here is the top half that sits right on it. There's the spring here, and the slide goes into it, and this is the lever for the choke. When you pull up on the throttle, it's supposed to release the choke, and it wasn't doing that, which is part of the reason I'm taking this carburetor apart. If you look in here, I think somebody put RTV or something all over this, trying to seal up a leak or something, and ended up causing more problems. So I'm gonna have to clean out at least enough to get everything to slide smoothly, and then I can spray it out and put it back together. Like that. I just pulled out a chunk of RTV, it's shoved in the side of there. Now it actually slides a lot more freely. That right there will actually probably solve my problem. But as long as we're in here anyways, we might as well pull the rest of these chunks out. So this is the way that I clean the carburetors. This is my little system here. Move everything over to the side here. We'll get another clean paper towel that nothing has been on yet. And this is where all the clean parts are gonna go after we clean them. This is the dirty parts. Once they're clean, they'll go on the clean side, and once everything's clean, then we'll reassemble it. And what we're mainly just doing is spraying out all the little passageways. Now if you have something that moves, move it and spray underneath it and around it. Spraying all these little holes, make sure everything's clear. When you're spraying, it's clean, it should be shooting out a different direction. And this carburetor body is actually pretty clean already. It was just that top piece with all the RTV that was in it that was causing a lot of issues. The scooter did run, it just wouldn't come out of choke. Make sure your hands are clean while doing this, because if you're touching clean parts with dirty hands, it's just going to be dirty parts. Spray through everything. These screens, you want to be careful on spraying. You don't want to accidentally ruin them while spraying. I'll clean that a little bit better if there's anything at all blocking it up. It's gone now. Here's the pin. Generally, if you can see some sort of daylight through it, it's probably okay. And then of course we have the bowl. The bowl is very important to spray out. Make sure we get that absolutely clean, because anything in the bowl gets sucked up through the jets. And remember, you can never get it too clean. Now that these parts are clean, we'll take this body here and start putting stuff back together. We'll start with this filter in here, this screen. And we'll put this back on it with the screw. Make sure that washer's in there so you can get a good seal. And it's going to be sitting like this, so I'm going to be facing it a little bit up so the fuel line can sit in there comfortably and not get kinked around. I'm just going to tighten this down, and that's good. Next thing we'll put on will be the mixture screw, which goes on the opposite side. Just kind of threads in right there. Usually you want to start at 1.5 to 2 turns out and then adjust from there. So we'll go all the way down till it just seats. Then we'll go half, 1, half, 2, and then we'll adjust from there later. Float bowl, and we'll set it gently in there. Make sure the needle goes into the place for the seat. Shove the retaining pin in, make sure it moves freely and there's no binding. The next thing would be the main jet, which is right in the center of this carburetor. It's this little brass piece with a tiny little hole in it, and it should have a number either on the top or the side. So we'll screw that in. There's no adjustment to this, it's just until it seats. You just want it to seat and then just ever so slightly, just make sure it's snugged up in there. Next would be the float bowl. We'll put the two screws on the sides here. We'll screw down one, just barely tight at all. And we'll snug that side up, and then we'll come back to this side and snug it up. That way it's seated evenly, and the gasket on the inside is compressed evenly, and there's no warpage of anything. And the only other thing we can do right now is put the filter on. So I can put the filter on right here. On these, it just presses into place. It's not very difficult. And the rest of these pieces will have to be assembled on the bike. So the very last part of this will be on the bike itself, on the throttle cable. You'll have this piece here, which is an adjuster, which goes over that, and then it all goes right into here. And screw that in, a few threads into there, just to make sure it holds. We'll back up the locking nut and screw this in so we actually have some room on this cable. You'll see how the thing slides right onto there, and the spring sits on top of the slide like that. And it all fits nice and neatly right into the carburetor like that. Once that's on there, the next thing we would do is screw these down to hold everything in place. We'll snug it up on the other side, and then we'll snug it up on this side. There we go. On these carburetors, when you push the choke in, and then you pull on the throttle cable, it should release the choke lever. In this case, it is now doing it, so we've successfully solved our problem. Next thing would be to reconnect your fuel line, and then pop it back onto the intake tube. Make sure it's level. It's going to be perpendicular to the ground, and then we'll tighten up this nut here. And then you may have to do some adjustments as far as the mixture screw goes, and the base idle adjustment there. But that's about it. The carburetor is back on the bike, and it's ready to be adjusted and fine-tuned, and ultimately ran.